John 4, 1 through 7. Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were, he left Judea and went away again into Galilee, and he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, being wearied from his journey, was sitting thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink."
If you have your Bibles handy and you would like to follow along, we're going to be studying from John chapter 4. John chapter 4, one of the more well-known Bible lessons or stories that you may have. It's the woman at the well. Now, when we study about the woman at the well, we're not going to be focusing on any kind of social injustice, ethnic prejudices, a woman being shunned. But what I want to leave you with is a lesson about who Jesus was and the character that Jesus exhibited during this situation where he met the woman at the well. So if you'll keep that in mind, we need to talk a little bit about the setting. We need to talk a little bit about the history, but we want to make some applications to this story that I think you and I can apply in our lives, in our dealings with others, and in trying to serve others, trying to reach out to others. So if you'll stay with me, hopefully we'll get there. I appreciate the opportunity so much to be here. I'm not a preacher. I'm a director of Fairhaven Children's Home, but I enjoy speaking from time to time about the Fairhaven, and I also can deliver lessons. I'm an elder at Watermill congregation in Springfield. I've served over 20 years, too long probably, but anyway, so I understand congregations. I understand our needs. I understand our struggles and our difficulties from time to time. We all have problems, and we're all trying to grow, and we're all trying to serve, and most importantly, we're all trying to get to heaven. So if we lose track of that, we've lost track of everything. I often say, and I mentioned it in class, if you don't know me, you haven't missed anything much, really. But if you don't know God and Jesus, you've missed everything. So our goal is, let's learn. Let's learn together a little bit about the woman at the well from John chapter 4. In the first part of this, let's talk just a little bit about the setting. We know that Jesus and his disciples had the need to depart from Judea. They had been in Judea, around the Jerusalem area. Pressure was getting a little bit. There was some efforts being made. There was some anger, resentment toward Jesus, the baptisms, the following he had. Not that Jesus was afraid to confront anything. We know better. But at his time, wasn't yet. And so they departed from there, and they were going to Galilee. Now, in order to get to Galilee, they needed to pass through Samaria. They didn't have to, and in fact, it was stated that many of the Jews would go miles out of their way not to have to go through Samaria. But the shortest route was to cross through Samaria. So they went into Samaria. And we all know about the Samaritans, don't we? Samaritans and the Jews were mortal enemies at that particular time. What had happened is during the reign of King Rehoboam, Rehoboam, and this was one of Solomon's sons, is when the kingdom was split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Now this goes all the way back to the 10th century BC period. And so you had the northern kingdom, which was Israel, and the southern kingdom, which was Judah. And they had their own kings, and it was a period of great difficulty and struggles. And they had a few good kings, but many bad kings. Kings that caused them a lot of problems. Kings that did very evil things. And eventually, the northern kingdom, which was Israel, fell to the Assyrians. And the Assyrians, according to their ongoing habit and way of dealing with things, is when they captured someone, they led the people off into captivity. Now, they led the people from the northern kingdom off into captivity. Some of them were allowed to stay. A few eventually found their way back, but those that remained there intermarried with other people. And so that was a great source of problems for Jews. Is you've got all these mixed blood people up here. You know, the Samaritans didn't even accept the teachings that the Jews had. They didn't acknowledge the teachings from the prophets. They didn't acknowledge all of it. They only acknowledged 5 books, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and they even had altered those a little bit. So the relationship was fragmented, to say the least. They even had their own temple of Mount Gerizim, and they said that that is where God intended for his people to be. So they each regarded each other as heretics. And so they didn't go. They didn't go into Samaria if they didn't have to. But nevertheless, Jesus and his disciples did. They went through Samaria to go over. Okay. Now, in crossing over to Samaria, it says they were tired. Jesus was tired. He was at the city of Sychar. It's near where Jacob's well was at. Being tired and thirsty, he sat down by the well while his disciples went into town to find something to eat, to get food. So it was the 6th hour. 6th hour would be around noon. Their day started at 6 a.m. 6th hour would be around noon. Now, very few people went to the well to draw water at noon, right? Hot, dry, arid country. It was the women's job at that time to draw the water in most cases, and most of the women would go early in the morning and draw water, or late in the afternoon, but it's more common that they would go early in the morning and they'd draw water from the well. Jesus is sitting there at the well, and the Samaritan woman comes to the well. Jesus said, "Give me a drink." He broke 3 Jewish customs, right? When he asked the Samaritan woman for a drink, he broke 3 standing Jewish customs. One of them was he spoke to a woman. He spoke to a woman not of his own family, his wife, mother, whatever, but he spoke to a woman. The woman came to the well, and on top of that, it's a Samaritan woman, someone that should be despised by any good Jew. Okay? And then he asked her for a drink. And it goes on to say in the scriptures, if you read in chapter 4, that he had nothing to drink from. So that meant what? He drank from one of her drinking utensils, right? Whether it be a bucket or whatever they used. So he took a drink from that, which would have made what? Impurity. Impure. You know, you don't drink. Even make him unclean. You know, it's an unclean situation for you, a Jew, to drink from a vessel from a Samaritan. You know, because they regarded each other, he regarded them as heretics. So Jesus is presenting himself here, and he's addressing this woman. So, if you read on in those verses, you find that Jesus knows a lot about this woman. He knows that she doesn't have a husband, but that she's had 5 husbands. She's lived an immoral life, you know, and he tells her that. And she's sitting there amazed. And she eventually goes back into town. She leaves her water pot, went back her way to the city, and she said to the men, "You come and see a man who told me all things that I ever did. Could this be the Christ?" Then they went out of the city and they came to him. In the meantime, his disciples urged him, saying, "Rabbi, eat." But he said to them, "I have food to eat of which you do not know." Therefore the disciples said to one another, they're confused, "Has anyone brought him anything to eat?" Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Do you not say there's still 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields. They are already white for harvest. And he who reaps receives wages and gathers fruit for eternal life, that both he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together." And so many of the Samaritans in the city believed in him because of his word, the word of the woman who testified, "He told me everything that I ever did." So when the Samaritans had come to him, they urged him to stay with them. And he stayed 2 days. And many more believed because of his own word. Then they said to the woman, "Now we believe, not because of what you said, for we ourselves have heard him, and we know that this is indeed the Christ, the Savior of the world." An unusual turn of events, to say the least. In a land where you're despised, meeting a woman that should be despised and shunned because of her immoral life, and yet the end result is they stayed 2 days and they believed and they listened to the teacher. They listened to Jesus teach them, and it says many believed. Now, here's what I really wanted to get to, is the application of how we can look at this story, how we can separate it out, how we can look at what Jesus did, and how that can apply to us, perhaps in our daily walks of life, or in how we engage others, or how we work with others, or how we bring others in. One of the things that Jesus did, point 1, he was available. He was available. Sometimes, folks, we just need to be available. We need to be available. We need to be available to our friends. We need to be available to our church family. We need to be available to people at work. Sometimes just being available. We need to be available to help people, to listen to people, to have to seek for that's where your opportunities are going to come. Are you available? You know? Second point, merciful. Jesus did not have, he did not have to show mercy toward this woman. He could have regarded her as despicable because he knew of her lifestyle. He knew that she had lived an immoral, adulterous life. But yet he was merciful to her. He talked to her. He asked her for water. He spent time showing that he cared. He showed some compassion for her, enough that she was willing to go share back in her town or her city, the Sychar. We have to learn to engage people. People say, what does engage mean? What does that mean? I'm going to share a story with you. I think that you'll help you understand. It sure made me understand about engaging. This happened to me personally, probably less than a year ago now. Is at Fairhaven. That little boy there, probably 8, and he was what I called an engaging little young man. You know what I mean? He was engaging. He would communicate. He would look you in the eye, and he was 8 years old, and he would talk to you. And I was sitting in the office. It was right after school, and usually that's the time when school's out that they come in the office or wander in and out. And a lot of times I'll go out there and sit just so I can see the kids a minute and visit with them, check them out, see how their school day was. But anyway, I was sitting out there, and he came in. I spoke to him. Hi, Aaron. I'm Mr. Barney. How was your day? My day was pretty good, and he started talking about it. Most kids go, okay, or whatever, but he was engaging, 8 years old. And he was looking me right in the eye, big brown eyes. I was sitting on the couch. We were about eyeball to eyeball. And he kept moving a little bit closer. And I said, you know something? I said, Aaron, I never had any boys of my own. I had 2 girls, but I never had any boys. But if I'd ever had a son, I would have wanted him to be just like you. He walked a little bit closer, he looked at me, and he looked right now and he says, do you love Jesus? Do you love Jesus? In other words, that comes with a condition. Do you love Jesus? And I said, yes, I love Jesus. And he got a little bit closer and he said, how do you love Jesus? This is a little 8-year-old boy. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, he's teaching me. He's engaging me. How do you love Jesus? And finally I just, I go, with all my heart. And then he goes, hit his chest and, yeah, with all my heart. So that is what is meant by engaging. You make contacts that lead into meaningful conversation, that presents its opportunities. It makes you think. Jesus did this in dealing with this lady. Meaningful conversations. Who do we engage? We've already mentioned it. We engage lots of people. We engage people at the grocery store. That doesn't mean we run up to them and say, come to Pacific Church of Christ. But you can develop a meaningful relationship if you work with the same cashier week after week or whatever. You gradually talk to them. You engage them. And they get to know, that's the kind of person I'd like to be. That person has something that I want. This woman, Jesus engaged her. Those people in Sychar knew that she had found something that they wanted. So they invited Jesus to come to them. Jesus went. And they stayed for 2 days teaching the Samaritans, of all people. And they believed. So we need to be, Jesus has taught us about how to engage. Jesus wants us to understand that people have needs. We all have needs. Some people have more needs than others. Some people have health needs. Some people may have mental health issues. Some people may have drug issues. Some people may have spiritual issues. We may have marital needs. We may have financial needs. Most people have needs. Jesus was going to provide living water to these people. Living water. Jesus was going to provide food for their souls. You know? So we all have needs. Jesus understood that. Not in just this story, but think about the other stories that Jesus has. The other places, the people that Jesus ministered to. It was mostly the needy, the helpless, the homeless, those with leprosy, those that were dying. Those are the people that Jesus understood needed his help. Priorities. Priorities in our life. You know, places like Fairhaven have more opportunities to be out among lots of our congregations. And just one of the things that I've noticed, going to church, being around fellow Christians is not a priority anymore for a lot of folks. It's just not. You know, so we just see that fewer and fewer people are just coming to our church services. And it bothers me because eventually some of those congregations won't be there. And I know that to be factual because I've seen it happen probably 10 times in the last 5 or 6 years. They've closed their doors. A lot of our rural congregations, they're down to 20, 25, 15 people, and they used to be 70, 80, 90, 100. You know, what are our priorities? Jesus' priority was not that he was hungry for food, not that he was even thirsty, but his priorities was to teach the lost, was to engage people, communicate to them. You know? And they listened. That was the priorities that Jesus wants us to have in our life. Be courageous. Be courageous. You know? By that, I guess I'm saying is sometimes we have to deal with people who have ruined lives. They absolutely have ruined lives, and yet they still need Jesus. They need Jesus more than anyone needs Jesus, or as much. And it takes a little courage. It takes a little courage. I don't know the most effective way anymore to bring people back to us, back into our service and the communities. What used to work doesn't work. And door knocking, not probably safe anymore. I do a door knocking campaign in many places. It's not. Gospel meetings, most people do not even attempt a gospel meeting because no one will show up, or very few. Can't really hardly even get their own people to bring people in. So, you know, we have to figure out, how are we going to engage people? How are we going to get people here? What do we need to tell them? What do they need to hear from us? Okay? The last thing that I would like to mention in what Jesus taught us is never forget what he has done for us. That's what it's all about. Never forget we go about our daily walks of life and engaging people, communicating with people, being available, having our priorities right. Should never forget what Jesus has done for us. He gave it all for me and for you, for our families, and for everyone. You know? What the church needs, I don't know. We need plans. How are we going to grow? You know, are we prepared? Do we have a plan if we're going to go out and we're going to try to convince people to come and worship with us, and we want to study the Bible with them? Do we have a plan? Are we going to use Jewel Miller film strips? You're probably, some of you, familiar with those. That's what people used to use, not so much anymore. Well, what do you have in mind? If you say, okay, and I say all this because we have gone through this fairly extensively over the last year on our thoughts on evangelism. And what can we do? And how can we get more people here? And what do we do after we get them here? We don't just shake their hand and say, we're glad you're here. You know, you've got to develop it and nurture it from that point on. And so what is your plan? You know, if you say we're going to talk to them about evangelism, what are you going to jump in head first and say, right now, your soul is lost? That's your opening statement? Not good. You know, that's not the approach to take. In my opinion, I think you have to have a plan. You know, are you going to take a chapter approach to bringing people in and to teaching them? Are you going to talk to them about Acts 17, where it talks about how great God is? Are you going to talk to them about Ephesians 2, where it talks about what sin is and that it's real? Are you going to talk to them about Romans 5 and 6, where it talks about the newness of life and putting away the old life? You know? Or are you going to try to do a one-chapter study and really get into it? Like if I was going to do a one-chapter study, I'd do Acts chapter 2. That would be my one-chapter study. If I was going to do a one-chapter study and break it down, it'd be Acts chapter 2, where the gospel is preached the very first time after Jesus' death, on the day of Pentecost. You know, where the covenant literally changes from the old covenant to the new covenant. And you got all those things in between there that you can study. So you have to have something in place if you're going to try to bring others in and to teach them and to mold them and to get them to believe, make them into believers, you know. And so you say, well, this is a long way from the woman at the well. The woman at the well was a biblical setting, but the story that we learn from it is, how did Jesus approach it? What did Jesus do? What was the impact of it? And how can we apply that to our lives? How can we apply those examples of Jesus to our lives? I know that anytime that a group of brothers and sisters meet together, that we always want to present an opportunity for anyone that has a prayer need, someone that has something that is on their heart, something that needs us to pray with them and for them. You always have that opportunity. Or if there's someone that wants to put on Christ in baptism, this is the opportunity. No better opportunity than now. So if you have any of those needs, if you would like to put on Christ in baptism, for us to pray with you, you now have that opportunity as we stand and sing.